Ready.
Yang gang, hello. It's great to see you. Tom, Paget, Matt, Roberto, some of my favorite people.
Thanks for having us, man. We're excited to be here. And we know we have about 40 minutes to chat with you, Andrew. So we're eager to kind of get across the whole panel. And the fine folks, Matt, Roberto, and Paget, were kind enough to let me ask the first question. And then we'll kind of round robin through. I guess my question for you, Andrew, for starters, is like, why did you decide to do this? And the elephant in the room is, what about the Biden administration? A lot of us were kind of speculating, and we're just kind of curious, like the thought process, the decision-making process, and how you decided to run.
Well, thanks, guys. For people who are watching this, I know you're zooming in. It's like, me, Tom, Paget, Matt, and Roberto are old friends because we worked on the presidential together. Super grateful that. And the fun thing is that when I was campaigning around the country, it's like I'd see Paget at this event. I'd see Matt at a lot of events because Matt literally like relocated. Which I appreciate so much. I think I met Matt's mom too, which was delightful. She's a great person. So it's great to be back with you all. So we all have a bit of history together, and it would be very reasonable to ask what Tom's asking because we met when I was running for president, and then I was campaigning for Joe and Kamala, and we had talks with the administration. There were some things that I wanted to try and get done nationally, and it was a really interesting time because like as soon as Joe and Kamala won, felt this weight lift because Trump's on the way out now. Holy crap! Can you imagine if Trump had won? Oh, I mean, like given what has happened over the last number of days.
I try not.
Yeah, it's very dark. So during that time, I was having convos with the Biden team, and we were going back and forth. And then at the same time, there were folks in New York City who were talking to me about running for mayor. And the more I started talking to them, I became more and more compelled. And the more I talked to the Biden administration, like some of the realities of the Biden administration, the big question in my mind, and this actually changed since I made this decision. Because at the time, it was very unclear whether the Democrats would have the Senate. You remember, like I was actually in Georgia campaigning, but there was like a real fear I had that it was going to be the Mitch McConnell show. And then like, if you can imagine trying to get big things done. And I was like, am I really going to like spend years trying to get things done and having just Mitch McConnell like strike everything down? Like that was a very dark feeling. And I was trying to keep that from being a reality by helping John Ossoff and Reverend Warnock win. Yay. So thank you, Yang Gang, for helping make that happen. Those were like the two paths I was on after Joe and Kamala won. And then the New York path became very, very clear to me over time because I just thought I could have a ton of impact and help a lot of people in the biggest city in the country. And I know, it's been great running too. Like I'm going to say this to folks who helped me on the presidential. I enjoy running for mayor more than I enjoyed running for president. The main thing is I see my family every day. I mean, that's a huge freaking change from the presidential. So I'm really glad I made this choice, but I was definitely seriously looking at roles in the Biden administration that address some of the problems I ran for president on. And I hope to still help solve those problems. Like if the Biden administration calls me, I've been trying to push people their way too, particularly in the tech space.
Cool. Well, I have more, but I'm going to hand it off to, is Matt next, I think?
Yep. I want to kick it off with a policy question. You made headlines on Friday when you said that you supported the decriminalization of sex work in New York City, and kind of along the similar vein of decriminalization. I'm curious, is the decriminalization of psychedelic mushrooms something you would pursue as mayor of New York City?
That is a great question, Matt. I haven't been asked that question yet. Marijuana, I believe, has already been decriminalized in New York City, which I would very much continue and embrace. I was always for partial decriminalization of sex work, which was for the sellers, typically the women. But it was brought to me that actually does not solve the problem fully, because you still end up with the same dangerous situations and the same preying on and vulnerability of a lot of these women if the buyers are still criminals. And so I was brought around to the fact that full decriminalization would be better, particularly if you could focus the resources on trafficking and underage, the victimization of underage women in particular. So decriminalization of psilocybin mushrooms, at a national level, I was for it. And in part because I spoke to military veterans who found that the only thing that helped them in their PTSD was psilocybin mushrooms. And you hear that, and then you look at some more data, and then you're like, wait a minute, like, why are we criminalizing this? Like, this stuff could literally be saving lives. And so I'd be very open to decriminalizing psilocybin mushrooms in New York City too, like if the same benefits were found here, which I'm pretty confident they would be.
All right,
Good to hear.
Next up is me. Andrew.
We might have just made some news, Matt. Go ahead, Paget.
He's already tweeted it out, man. Matt's on it.
First of all, will your PowerPoint presentations be better than Andrew Cuomo's? Number one. And and also, what would be the American scorecard for New York City? What are like the tenets of success? How are we going to measure it? What are the top priorities that we should be measuring to see that New York City is going in the right direction?
Thank you, Paget. One reason I was so excited about running for mayor was that you actually can implement a lot of the things that I was running on nationally, including a scorecard. And I've already been to several communities that have really been devastated by the pandemic, but also were not in great shape pre-pandemic. And if you looked at how their children were doing or rates of maternal and infant mortality, they're totally unconscionable and unacceptable even pre-pandemic. So those are the kind of data points we should be using. We should have been using the whole time, would be around childhood success rates and healthy development in various ways, both physically and mentally, for a lot of people in New York City. And the data is going to be, frankly, staggeringly poor, like when we actually put it out there. And one thing I'm excited about is New York City actually has its own Department of Economic Data and Analysis. If New York City was its own, was a country, it would be the 11th biggest economy in the world. Talking about GDP in the metro area of like 1.8 trillion, and it's got its own Department of Economic Analysis. So we're going to have a scorecard. We're going to have PowerPoint decks. We're going to start putting them out there. But one of the things that I also realize is that if we do have data and scorecards, it's probably going to have to be neighborhood specific, because the situations vary so dramatically across neighborhoods. Like each neighborhood has its own feel, set of issues, texture. It's really been fascinating on that level. But yeah, it's going to be very data heavy, and we're going to put out really just how bad things are, and then try and change them.
It's good to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Paget. Great seeing you.
Hey, Andrew, I'm up next. Your favorite friendly neighborhood YouTuber. I have a question for you, and I think you might resonate with this. As a first-generation American, I was actually born in Brooklyn, New York. Maybe a lot of people watching, feel that they would like New York represented here. I don't live in New York now. I live here in Atlanta, Georgia. Thank you for coming on down and for helping Georgia get on the right path and for getting those seats.
I got to say, New York's going to benefit so much for the fact that the Senate's now blue, because you literally had aid for cities and states stalled in the Senate, and then now it's unstalled. So freaking Georgia.
Yeah, indeed. Something that gets to me is my family immigrated to New York and saw it as the land of opportunity. My family comes from Panama, and my entire family is still up in New York. And I think about my friends and family up north all the time, because New Yorkers are still facing these issues that happened to them even before the pandemic. Vulnerability to homelessness, overcrowded schools. I don't live in New York now, but I did grow up there for a time. My parents moved me out of New York for a reason, and my younger siblings. I went to PS 139. Overcrowded schools were a problem then, they're a problem now. High poverty rates, unemployment, after school care. I feel that these might be like 4 or 5 of the biggest issues New Yorkers face and deal with. What would a Yang administration, with you at the forefront of being mayor of New York, how would you address these major issues? And could you have created a New York that my family would have been proud to raise me in?
Where did your family head, Roberto? Was it? It wasn't straight to Georgia, was it?
No, my family has lived all over the East Coast primarily because I'm the son of a soldier, of a veteran, of a Marine, the proud son of a Marine and a nurse. And so I've lived all over the East Coast with my siblings, and we visited New York every summer. But my parents also, even when my father was deployed, my mom was hesitant and reluctant to ever move us back to New York for any long period of time.
But you still have a lot of family here, I take
Almost all my family.
So does that mean that you have cousins and relatives that came of age in New York, and that do you get together and compare notes?
We do. And unfortunately, at quite a few of the funerals, as a lot of those people, aged up, and unfortunately, some things with the pandemic and so on and so forth. But yeah, we compare notes, and there are a lot of issues in New York that have unfortunately created situations that people found themselves in, and that's why this matters to me.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. I spoke to a group of Black activists on Friday night, and the way they characterized it is similar to the way you characterized it, which is that that there's no one thing you can do that actually alleviates the problem or changes the situation. That you'd have to do, let's call it 8 things at once, or something along those lines. And you can look at it. It's housing and the cost thereof, and the fact that a lot of people are in substandard housing that hasn't been repaired in years and years. And then it's education, which you're referring to, where you have overcrowded schools. And right now those schools are closed. So you have people who were already behind falling much further behind. I mean, they've already missed essentially a year. And then it's the access to opportunities that they would have and the role models they have in their community. And they're very forthright where they say, look, there's just not a lot of hope in a lot of these places. One thing I will say, and you actually represent this in some ways, Roberto, because you're like this very talented creator. When I was in Brownsville with a state assemblywoman named Latrice Walker last week, and I need to go back because you saw things that were very, very dark and bleak, and people who had given up, or didn't have the resources to be able to thrive at, or even get by in some cases. And then you had some activists who were doing incredible work in that community. Not even activists, like there was one person who had started a design center and then was teaching students how to design, and then was farming them out as labor to various corporate clients. That there was another group. I'm actually gonna go back there because I spent so little time there, and I said, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen, where they tried to create like an urban farm, and they largely succeeded. Like when I show you the video of this, it's going to blow your mind. It blew my mind. And so like the thing I took from it was that it's not even necessarily for someone to show up and say like, hey, like we're going to dump this program or do this program or do that program. Like you have to find what's working in these communities and then augment it and pour resources on it and amplify it. Like we all know, I think that like I'm very much like a ground up or a people up person. Like I think that if you get resources into people's hands, then problems tend to get better. And there are people doing heroic things in a lot of these communities that are really like that organization. I talked to them about their money, and I was like, hey, I was staggered at how much they got done with like not that much money. And then it was like, well, what would you need to like actually scale this to change an additional 100 lives or something like that? And they told me, and I was like, that's not that much money. I was like, I got to come back here and try to get you this money. Those are to me the opportunities. You do have to try and get the basics right, and New York City has not gotten the basics right for a lot of people. And then you have to try to amplify the things that are happening that are positive that can draw more people in. Because a lot of it is about folks feeling like they have something to invest in for their own future, that they have some kind of path forward. And if they don't, then they end up turning to gangs and other things that give them some form of structure. It is very, very tough. And your family's lived it, Roberto. And the activists on Friday really helped me see that it is something where it's like you have to try and attack it from every angle. And I would even say some of the stuff you do probably is not going to work, but that would be fine, like in the sense that, because what's going on right now is 100% not working. So if you're trying a number of things, like as long as some of them have an impact, you're going to improve something.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for always trying, and thank you for caring, more importantly, and thank you for your optimism and your honest answer.
Well, appreciate it, man. Really, like I've learned a ton, even in the last number of hours, and that's been very, very powerful. I learned a lot running for president too, but it was from people in different communities. New York City is its own thing. I mean, clearly, like New York City is, and the people here have like different obstacles that have been in their lives for a long time.
Andrew, let me build on that. And you mentioned that a lot of New York's problems don't have a silver bullet solution, and I'm curious what the organizing principles are behind this mayoral campaign. So with the last national effort, I could summarize Yang as focusing on automation, basic income. Opposite of Trump is a guy who likes math. I'm curious, what are the bullet points for the New York campaign?
The bullet points for the New York campaign, number one is New York City has to become the fastest post-COVID comeback city in the country. If it does not do that, then we are going to face very, very dark times for a long time. And I'm a numbers guy, so here are some of the numbers that have struck me like thunderbolts. Over 25,000 New York City residents have died. I think it may be up to 26,000 or so, because people are dying every day. So people are losing their friends, neighbors, loved ones. Over 500,000 have been infected. 60 million tourists who would have shown up in 2020 did not show up. And they supported over 300,000 jobs of various types. And you can imagine those jobs are, it's like bus tour operator, Broadway usher. Over 10,000 small businesses and restaurants have closed, never to reopen. At least there's no plan for them to reopen. Subway ridership is down over 60%. Midtown real estate is about 80% vacant. The unemployment rate is double that of the national average. So if you look at the concerns are freaking everywhere, and you can feel it everywhere you go. So when you're in that situation, you look up and say, okay, at what point do vaccinations reach a point where everyone's commuting back in and things are more like they were pre-pandemic? And I'm of the opinion that if New York City does not lead that charge, that recovery is going to be very ragged. I think there are a lot of folks, another number I should have thrown out there, about 250,000 New York City residents have left the city. And there are another, I'm sure, a similar number who right now are weighing whether this is where they're going to be. I have a friend who said to me that one of his key employees came to him and said, "Hey, my wife wants to leave." And then he's like, that conversation is happening in a lot of different environments. So New York City needs to try to accelerate the recovery from COVID, and it's not going well so far, where the vaccination rollout has not been great. I think it's improving as we speak. So this is a very long-winded bullet, Tom, of saying post-COVID comeback, recovery city is number one. And I think folks have probably heard that what I'm going to use New York City as like the vanguard for is vaccination passport, where you're going to have on your smartphone, look, I got vaccinated, and then you can just scan it and then go into the theater, show, bar, restaurant, club. Like for New York City to be the post-COVID comeback city, it's going to be the first place where people can gather conscientiously and safely and take their mask off. Because, if everyone in the room has been vaccinated, you're feeling pretty good at that point. So that's number one. Number two is that a lot of the things that I wanted to run on in terms of anti-poverty, we're going to make happen here in New York City. So three of the things that I've already proposed is $1 billion in basic income. Very excited about that. That's going to be great fun. And Martin Luther King III is co-chairing my campaign. So I feel like that's a great thing on MLK weekend. We're going to try to get high-speed internet to the 29% of New Yorkers who don't have it, because if you don't have data at this point, like it's another form of poverty. And we're going to try to get the 12% of New Yorkers who don't have financial services a bank account. And if you're unbanked or underbanked, you're spending thousands of dollars extra on check cashers and money lenders and the rest of it. And I just made an announcement this morning that that New York City and its, let's call it $85 billion budget, will not do business with banks that don't accept New York City ID as a way to open a bank account, because then that's going to include a lot of folks who are undocumented and immigrants or children of immigrants. So those are the first two pillars, Tom. And then the third is just going to be fucking competence. It's like the problem like a lot of people are facing is just like, you just don't have any confidence that the city's actually executing at a high level, and like it's just kind of like this miasma of of confusion sometimes. I mean, it's a very, very bad feeling. I know as a parent too, it's like I talked to Evelyn about like the school's decision making, and they just have like meetings about meetings over and over again. And everyone's like, just tell me what the hell like the decision point's going to be. So the third thing is really is just going to be the like, look, like I'm going to be an efficient operator. Like, we're going to try to make the bureaucracies function better, more responsively. Like we're going to have people, like one thing as an example, I want to have a small business recovery czar and task them saying, we are going to reopen 15,000 businesses in year one. And just have them, it's like, look, your information is going to be posted and any small business owner should be able to get in touch with you. And then just, you know what I mean? It's like you have like the soulless intake, then like, no, everyone's like just goes into some queue somewhere. It's like, this is the human. This person's accountable to you. And then what's going to happen is that person's going to get bombarded, obviously, with lots of stuff. And then they'll have to build like an org to like help accommodate the fire hose. I'd much rather that situation than the no one knows who's responsible situation.
Thanks, Andrew. That sounds really compelling, and I'm a little jealous that we won't get your help in other cities, but excited to see that applied in the greatest city in the country. I'll hand it to Matt for a follow-up.
No, really, I'm just going to throw something out here. So like, would you all visit New York City, next year and have like a reunion here? I mean, Roberto has family here. Like, do any of the rest of you have ties here?
Oh yeah. I grew up in New Jersey, so
it's easy
used
for
to go to Chinatown.
I definitely have friends in New York City. Yeah.
I might be making a visit before June, so.
Oh yeah, Matt. I mean, heck, you can hang out with us on the trail. It'll be fun.
There's no place
look at
like
that
home.
Reunion in New York.
Yeah, no place like home. I'm down.
Andrew, I want to ask you, one of the things that makes New York City really unique is the fact that it has one of the highest populations of Jews of any city in the world. But unfortunately, in recent years, anti-Semitism and other hate crimes have been on the rise. And I'm curious what your plan is to combat anti-Semitism and combat those hate crimes so that people are able to feel safe living in their own communities.
Anti-Semitism is very real. It's very dangerous. The city of New York has to stand against anti-Semitism at every level. And so to the extent that the city government can send that message, in some cases, it may mean responding to real threats against synagogues and communities, because these threats are happening. One thing I'm going to suggest would be very helpful, and this applies to a slightly different group, but I think it speaks to some of the same issues. The NYPD has to rigorously try to screen out extremists and folks who have hateful ideologies, because in a department of tens of thousands, there are going to be some folks who have those ideas, similar to what's happening, frankly, that we see at the national level with the U.S. Capitol Police or the military. There's like there are a number of recent pieces about it. So we have to be constantly vigilant because anti-Semitism is so virulent. I had a friend that I worked with for years, and he's Jewish. And at one point we started talking about our families, and I asked him about his family's background. And he had entire generations die in the Holocaust. And, he told me about essentially like entire, like half of the family tree just gone. And I heard him talking about this, and I was like, I cannot imagine what that feels like, and how that would forever change you, just knowing that half of your family tree had been killed in a genocide. So that they have a different historical perspective that I believe more of us need to take more seriously, frankly. It's like, I feel like the Jewish population has seen what hatred can do to an entire people and on a global scale. And the United States for a long time has not taken hate seriously enough.
So Andrew, I wanted to just ask about strategy. So only about 12% of registered Democrats came out to vote in the last mayoral primary, and 70.
I think it might even be lower than that. No, 12% sounds about right. All right, let's say 12%.
It was under 12. It was 11 point something. I did the math, but
I'm so glad you did the math, Paget. This is
I know.
Great. This is very us.
And but what was a little bit strange to me is that 75% of them voted for de Blasio, despite the fact that it seemed as though he was a pretty unpopular sort of political figure, at least among most New York City residents, like at least at the end of the term. So is changing the electorate going to be an essential part of your strategy in winning? Like, how do we accomplish this? Because you did very well in that poll, but like that is the general population of New York City residents, whereas they're probably not represented in the people who actually come out to vote in the mayoral primary. So, how do we help accomplish this? And can you just talk a little bit around that?
Well, I'd love to, Paget. So I'd say there are three groups of people that we're targeting. And the first group are the folks who are in the 11.5% you're talking about, who are like really regular New York City mayoral voters. And most of like I am not in that 11.5% historically, like that. Like so there are the folks who've been hardcore in New York City politics. They tend to be a little bit older, and we need to make our case to them. And they're going to listen to community leaders. They're going to listen to folks who represent them. So I need to work very hard to make my case to community leaders, to people directly, in various ways. Now, I'm happy to say that we actually do have like a reasonable base of support within that group. Like if you look at I guess the number would be somewhere around like, let's call it 700,000 to 800,000 regular voters. Maybe a little lower. It's maybe like 670,000 New York City residents who vote. I'm like still reasonably popular. And one thing that helped me with that group, their average age is in the 50s. Was the fact that I was on CNN a lot, because a lot of them watch a lot of CNN, and then they're like, oh, that guy, he's like pretty reasonable. So that's group one, and we have to work very hard to get them, and that's a lot of like the socializing with community leaders and elected officials and endorsements. The second group are the many registered Democratic voters in New York City who would get out to vote for Joe Biden, but do not get out to vote in the mayoral. And can we activate a bunch of those people? I'm pretty confident we can. Like I actually was joking with someone. I'm like the ideal messenger for that group because like I'm one of them. It's like like I'd vote in the national, so like but I wasn't voting in the mayoral. So it's like, hey guys, like you might want to show up. So Bill de Blasio, if you look at the numbers, I think he won the primary with like something like 280,000 votes. In a city of 8.3 million. I mean, that's like a very, very small fraction. It's like a fraction of a fraction. And so we're just going to need a lot more folks who don't vote in local elections to vote this time. And I think that they will, because I think this election is going to be higher profile. I think we're going to be able to make the case to them. And then the third group is people who just aren't registered to vote and like have been like completely disengaged. And there's one group in particular that interests me in that category, which is Asian Americans, because Asian Americans are voting at something like half of the level of some other communities. I mean, there's a lot of room to grow. Asians, there's a lot of room to grow. So, so to the extent that we're trying to register new voters and activate new folks, like there are, we're interested in every group, but I think Asian Americans would be the first place.
That's a perfect segue into my question. So, Andrew, you yourself were challenged on your voting record statistically as a citizen, not as someone voting within the system. Not your voting record there, but as a citizen, as being one of those. And you coined it perfectly. You said, yes, I'll admit to being 83% of New Yorkers who don't participate. And I think you owned that very well. So kudos to you. But my question becomes this. With that overwhelming statistic of 83% of people who aren't engaged in the process, who don't feel that their voice matters, how do you deal with the fact that historically, specifically, Black voters, and we saw there was a lot of tension around that idea in this national election. How do you deal with the idea that there are disengaged Black voters that make up a stunning population of New York across all of the boroughs, and who don't feel that they have a voice, or that their vote matters, or that their vote is really being leveraged against their own interest, when the fact is, and this is a fact, is if you look at it, it seems like people only care about their issues every 2 to 4 years when they need that vote. So what is it that's going to be different with how you approach the activation of those voters who feel that they don't play for any stakes?
Well, I think that's one thing I bring to the table, Roberto, is that for me, like, I'm operating with different deliverables than I think traditional Democratic candidates might. Starting with cash, it's like I think I may be the first candidate just walk around being like, hey, I think we should just put $1 billion into the hands of folks who are like in extreme need. And unfortunately, the reality is a disproportionate number of those people would be Black. That's the way not just the city but the country works. So I think some degree of independence from what has gone before is actually attractive to some of the people you're describing. Like some of the people that have checked out the system and been like, oh, like, doesn't matter what's going on. These people don't actually do anything in my community. And I actually heard that multiple times in Brownsville. When I was there, they'd be like, it doesn't matter. Like, that like this project will still be neglected and the rest of it. And when I hear that, I think to myself, like, this person is just speaking from experience. You know what I mean? So like can't argue with it. Like they're just seeing, the problems get worse. So I think if you're that kind of voter, you'd actually may be very attracted to an Andrew Yang. I will confess to you all something. I am much, much more concerned about trying to do this job at a high enough level to get the city back on its feet than I am about winning this job. You know what I mean? Like that's where my head is right now. Like I'm trying to figure out, Roberto, how I can actually follow through for that person.
I believe that, and I see that in the way that you carry yourself. I see somebody who's compassionate and who cares and who puts the problems and the people first, and that you'd rather attack problems than attack other people. You'd rather attack the problems that people in New York and all over the country are facing than, attack your political opponents. And I respect you for that, and I tip my hat to you.
Oh, thank you. Someone said something to me today, and this is someone who's worked in New York City politics for a little bit. He said that, Andrew, if you win this race, you have the chance to potentially transform New York City politics. And I dare say that there would be a lot of people who would like to see a transformation of New York City politics right now, because there is so much insideriness to the considerations. And we're talking about like insiders upon insiders, like insiders upon insiders are getting voted on by like a very small fraction of the electorate. And so if you expand the number of folks who are interested in this election, and the reality is I think turnout's going to be sky high this time because everyone sees how important this one's going to be. So I feel good on that level. I feel good about how bad things are. Unfortunately, it's like, because I don't feel good about how bad things are. I mean, I'm just saying, like, because of how bad things are, I think people are going to be very activated.
Speaking of the insider politics and the kind of institutions that you'll have to work with, one of the things you said when you were looking at national problems is that there were three responses when you would tell people about those problems. Like one is like, this is not a problem. Another one was like, it's a problem, but we can't fix it. Or a third is we should study it. What are you hearing when you talk to New York insiders about your views and vision?
One of the frustrations I would have with a lot of New York City insiders is they don't seem that focused on policy or solutions. Some of them are, and the ones that are, I actually really tend to get along with. Others of them very, very much less so. For others of them, it's like politics as sport, politics as competition. The big problem I have at the city level, and this is something I think I can help with, but this is just the reality. So I ran for president saying, look, we should give everyone $1,000 a month. And people are like, oh, where are you getting the money? And be like, don't worry, we have the money. Like, it'll be fine. On this one, it's like, hey, we should really get the city of New York back on its feet. And then they're like, where are you going to get the money? And that's actually a very real question, because unlike the federal government, like we don't, have the capacity just to, go into debt even to the tune of, billions and billions of dollars. So running New York City is going to be a very, very resource intensive leadership exercise, in the sense that, like, you're going to have to stretch the money. You're going to have to make some very difficult decisions. Like, there is going to be waste that you find. But then what I've been saying to folks is, look, like, when it comes to a lot of the city expenses, you're going to find some fat. And then you're going to look around and say, look, we're going to have to take a little bit of flesh here. So, like, help me find the flesh that you can live without most easily. And let's avoid the bone. You know what I mean? So one example I would use as the bone, it's like, I do not think you should raise subway fares. Like, I think that's the bone. Like, if you raise subway fares, then like the already reduced ridership would probably go down, and your city gets less functional, not more functional. So you have to be very judicious about the way you try and turn to different resources. It's a very different thing than at the federal level. In the federal level's case, I think it's pretty clear for everyone to see at this point. Like, we've had the resources, we've just been spending them on the wrong things. We've just spending them on like the defense and corporate bailouts, and like bailing out Wall Street for $4 trillion. And it would just put that money in people's hands. Our way of life would have been better years ago, decades ago. For New York City, there is a set of resources that comes in and a set of resources that comes out, and it's constrained. And there's going to be approximately a $5 billion budget deficit every year for the foreseeable. So you have to reckon with that in a very real way. And that does limit. So, I think $1 billion to combat extreme poverty in New York City is tremendous. Would I rather it be $10 billion or something, like $100 billion? Of course I would. Like, I can commit to $1 billion, and I feel like we can get there very responsibly. But if I were in charge of the federal government, I would have been like, let's do these stimulus checks and let's do them every month. There's like really no reason not to at this point. So yeah, like, I think that's the biggest distinction in terms of how you have to operate in this kind of setting.
Thanks, Andrew. I think Matt's gonna ask the last question before we run out of time.
I'm having so much fun, and I don't want it to be unfair. So we're going to make sure that there's an equal number of questions. So Matt, and then we'll keep on going. I'm sure Paget and Roberto have something.
That sounds great. Yeah, then it'll be Roberto will have the last one if we go in the same order as before.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm sure Roberto and Paget will appreciate that. I wanted to ask a question about police and the NYPD. In major cities across the country this summer, including, of course, New York City, we saw mass protests against police brutality after the killing of George Floyd. And on your campaign website and in some speeches, you've listed Eric Garner as another case of just someone being unsensibly killed at the hands of police. I'm curious if in New York City, tragically, while you were mayor, a citizen lost their lives unjustly at the hands of police. What is like kind of the first thing that you would do to figure out like what is the situation, like how you would respond to the community, but as well as like the police side of things? It just seems like a very difficult situation, and I'm curious how you would handle it.
Well, I think a lot of the frustration people feel, Matt, is that when a police officer does something that results in someone dying, and even if it's captured on film, that there's not a lot of accountability. And so then you have to look at, well, like, how does a police officer get held accountable? And a lot of it right now is that it goes through a police commissioner, and the police commissioner is often a part of the same general culture as the department that they're in charge of. And there are very, very stringent union rules in place that limit what can be done in some cases. But to me, you need a leadership change. I've now talked to maybe a couple dozen police officers just walking around New York City in the last 72 hours. And you know, in the Bronx, it was like a black male cop and a Latino woman cop. Like that, they're like, to me, what you have to look at really is like leadership at the top. And so if you can have a civilian commissioner of the NYPD that can actually hold someone accountable if they do something like result in the death of Eric Garner, then I believe that the public outcry would be very, very different than if the people did not actually feel like someone was going to be held responsible. Because what happens right now is that when a police officer does something that results in someone's loss of life, there's like this giant bureaucracy that isn't like that then is standing between that police officer and accountability. And so if you can actually cut through that bureaucracy because you have the right leadership in place, then I think you can change the dynamic really, really significantly. And I think that's what a lot of people in New York want to see.
Andrew, I have a question for you, which hopefully is a fun question, but some people,
fun question?
Well, I hope it's a fun question. I hope it's fun.
I'm sure it will be with that kind of preface, Paget. I mean, at this point, it'd be like, fun question, and then like, yeah.
Okay, well, I hope it's going to be fun to answer. But so actually, some people have noticed that you kind of have a change in your tone in the way you campaign. You seem more confident, maybe even like less apologetic and just more assertive, even just against attacks in the face of some random attacks online. And otherwise, is this part of a campaign strategy? Was this a conscious decision, or is this just like a natural evolution of your experience in politics and what we've seen from your experience, in your presidential campaign? Are you just having more fun?
I am enjoying myself, so thank you for noticing, Paget. It's certainly not part of some, strategic decision. It's me kind of responding the way that I naturally respond. This is a very different race, and I'm a very different figure within that race. So one of the things that's very real is that there was zero upside in attacking Andrew Yang, the presidential candidate. You know what I mean? like that was a no one's like, what you really need to do is kneecap Yang. Like that's the path to success. So like I always be hang out. And even the reverse was true. Like when there was when I would get into an exchange with Elizabeth Warren or Bernie on the debate stage, they would just drop it immediately because they were like, there is zero upside to me, exchanging with Yang. There was zero upside to anyone exchanging with Yang. Plus, I got along with most of the other candidates pretty well. Now, I believe I would get along with most of the mayoral candidates pretty well too on a personal level. Like I've met a couple of them, and they're like really great people. I tend to give people who run for office the benefit of the doubt because it's such like a difficult undertaking that a lot of people are actually doing it for very altruistic reasons. And so for me to get attacked in this race, it's just a very different thing where there actually is political upside to attacking me in this race, like a great deal of political upside, as it turns out, for other people. And so then I have to respond to it in a way that puts people in a place where they're confident in me and my leadership, and would be confident in my leadership as mayor. I think that's actually maybe the biggest learning or evolving I have already had to do. Which is, and this is something I appreciate a great deal, which is if I was just a voter who didn't really know Yang from a whole lot, I would want to know that Yang is going to have confidence in his own decisions and stick to his stick to his beliefs. And if someone yells at him, he'll be like, that's cool. We're just going to keep doing this, because I think it's right. I actually think that is intrinsic to the job of being mayor of New York City. I think if you were the mayor of New York City and you make a good decision, there's someone that's going to be very, very pissed off about it, because it's a very big, diverse city. And so you actually would want to know that a mayor is not going to like buckle under criticism. So I think that that's actually really awesome about what's already happened in this race, is that like people feel like, like to the extent that they wanted to see that in me, then they're like, okay, like, Yang's pretty like fine, like, with someone like criticizing or having like, that's actually my favorite thing, like image so far from this campaign has been like I was in the subway with my team going back, and then there was this guy reading the New York Daily News, and the headline was me, and it was like, but it was like a critical headline. It was like, Yang takes flack for da 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 da. And so then like I stood next to the headline being like, hey, look, like it's, I made the paper. And like, and I'm not sure if people could zoom in on the article and notice that it was like actually like, like not a very flattering headline. But I think that the fact that, like I would see that and be fine with it, which I genuinely was. I was actually more amused by seeing the headline than anything else. Like, I think that's what they want in a mayor. It's like if you had a mayor that was like reading those headlines being like, like, I mean, right now with this crisis, like that would be the worst thing in the world.
Yes. People are saying it's working, so it's great.
Oh, thanks, Paget.
Well, Andrew, I guess it's down to you and me. So first of all, let me congratulate you and give you your clout card for finally being somebody that can, it's worth attacking finally.
I know, it's true, Roberto. It's like, yes, upside for
yeah. Oh,
that's
wow.
funny.
Yeah, I'm actually worth attacking. Like, so it means I'm doing something right. With that in mind, all joking aside, because we're having fun here, the serious question I think that's on everybody's mind as we end the evening is, can you tell us some more details around the idea of the New York Basic Income Project and how this, fits into the grand plan, so to speak, of mainstreaming basic income with New York? If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And also, like, this is, a somewhat unfair dual question. It's like, I mean, is that part of the plan for a post-pandemic New York? What's the plan for a post-pandemic New York? What's the funding mechanism for New York's basic income?
Oh, thank you. It's a tremendous question. I had a blast with you all. It's great to be able to convene with people that, I grew to become friends with over the last number of months. I will say, for folks who are new to this campaign, we would love for you to be part of it. And the best way for you to be part of it is just to donate $10 at yangfornewyork.com, or I think it's like Y4NY also goes there. Also, AndrewYang.com goes there. I should be able to just start saying that. But if you donate $10 to the campaign, that's immensely helpful. And then you'll become this insider, and we'll send you all the fun updates. I am so pumped to have the basic income in New York City at a bigger scale than is true in any other city in the country. And I went through the budget and became confident that we could free up $1 billion, and also that $1 billion would pay itself back in many ways. And the most direct way is that when someone is on the streets of New York City typically spends tens of thousands of dollars per person in different ways. And so if you can keep someone in a better situation, you'll actually save some of that money. I also want to try and find private philanthropic dollars to augment the $1 billion. Like the $1 billion, I believe we can fund publicly, but I want to try and get another $1 billion. And I think it'd be a pretty good pitch to philanthropists, some of whom are already spending money on either anti-poverty work or New York City, and say, look, how would you like to help alleviate poverty in New York City? This will be great. You can hang out with the mayor. We'll have a press conference. Everyone will love you, like that'll be all. So I'm going to try and leverage it in various ways. But I think having basic income in New York City is going to be a very, very powerful example for others, because I think New York City is still the leading light in many respects. It's such like a massive part of who we are as a country, that if New York City has a basic income, I'm looking forward to joining Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. That organization? It'd be so fun. Andrew Yang's gonna like join that thing if they'll have me. I'm sure they'll have me. I'm friends with some of them.
Is the $1 billion year one, or would it be over your tenure over a period of time?
It's per year, Roberto. We're going to try and make that thing happen. And then I've got like a few plans on generating revenue in different ways. So that they're like, you have to do a few things at once, unfortunately. So of the major measures to generate revenue. One I've talked about openly that I'll just share here again is that property tax is the most durable source of revenue for New York City. There are major property owners in New York City that are tax exempt and are thus not paying property tax, and they're benefiting from police and fire department protection. The most blatant and egregious example is Madison Square Garden right now is a tax abatement that's worth $40 million a year, and Madison Square Garden does not need a tax break. Like it's like a multi-billion-dollar organization. And the joke was like when this was going to sunset, they threatened to move, and that really literally made me laugh out loud. I was like, "What, are you going to move the Knicks? Like where? Like what are you even talking about? Yeah. Like your entire thing is your location. Are you like So it made me laugh. So there are ways that we can get some revenue back and start trying to pay for this. I'm excited to disclose the second and third sources of revenue that we're looking at, and I hope that like we come up with new plans. What's been interesting is that to have a meaningful source of revenue in $85 billion budget, like it needs to be in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. So like that's like the mission we're on, is find other opportunities that will not frankly like impede the comeback, because there are a lot of organizations and people that right now are trying to figure out whether New York City is going to be where they're going to keep their company or home or whatever it is.
Hospitality being a major part of that, the hospitality industry being crushed, a lot of the food services industry. So I know you're very passionate about small business. I know that that's what Venture for America was all about. People may forget you were a champion of change. You helped build small businesses and entrepreneurship all across this country once upon a time. And I think that bringing that to the crown jewel of America, to New York City, can only be a good thing. I think that it's still, like it was for my family, represents to many people opportunity.
Yeah, that's one thing I love about you four and a lot of folks in the Yang Gang, where like there's like a real creativity and entrepreneurship streak, or not even a streak in some cases. Like it's like the whole like color pattern or whatever. It's true. It's true of like several of you. I mean, you're like very entrepreneurial and enterprising. And like the tough thing that's going on here in New York City is that the needs are just so great and so stark, and people are so hurting. That we're going to need to try and do things that take advantage of some people's capacity to reopen business and the rest of it. And then other people, we just need to help get on their feet. It's such a big job. Like, one of the things that I see very clearly is like, I think I can add a ton of value in this job. I think if I can get through like, to a point where New York City is working again in a number of years, I think there are going to be some very tough decisions. There are going to be some people that are really like upset with me about something I did within that time period, but that I'll be able to look in the mirror and say like, I helped get the city back to a point where we're excited about it, because there is no guarantee that New York City is going to come back in a way that we want it to come back. Like it really is at that point. And I believe I can help get us on the right footing and the right path.
Well, Andrew, clearly we are just getting the conversation started. So hopefully in the future, we'll be able to continue it with you either in these group environments, or you're welcome, I'm sure, to drop by any of our individual channels as well.
Yeah, I would love that. Let's do it again. And so you guys know, it's like we're having this conversation and my team just like dropped this in my lap and said donate, because like, because I like don't really talk about like donate to Yang for New York. And so someone was like, hey, ask him to donate. So that's what happens. Like Yang just like, is doing something, and then someone tells me to do something. It's sort of like being married. I'm like married to my team. Yeah.
Well, AndrewYang.com.
You can do donate.
What was that?
Yeah.
That's the number one thing people can do right now is donate.
Yeah, just donate $10, particularly if you're a New York City resident, which then your $10 like magically multiplies, and the city gives a campaign $80 on top of it. So if you donate 10, we get 90. Can you believe that? I mean, it's the greatest deal ever. And so if you know anyone in New York City who likes me or owes you $10, just be like, yo, just give Yang $10, and then it'll be like 90. It'll be glorious. Glorious. I'm the math guy. I love this matching stuff.
I'll dip into the coffers, Andrew, and I'll just donate $10 for every member on both sides of the family. So
wow. Do it.
AndrewYang.com.
I don't know if that's legit. So maybe I can't say it. So, I'm going to look into that.
You'll see it. You'll see it come through.
Thank you guys. Have a great night. We'll do this again soon. Love you all.
Thanks, Andrew. Good luck out there, buddy.
Come to New York City. It's going to be great.
Take care.
Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone else online. See you soon.